Hey everyone, Mike Kaprowski here from Opportunity Dallas. To help raise awareness of our efforts, we're going to start putting out a series of short videos, and we're calling it To the Point because it'll be short and direct. And sometimes we'll share new analyses that we've done, offer commentary on current events, talk about ideas and potential solutions. So this is episode 1, and we'll see how it goes. So somebody asked me the other day, hey, if your tagline at Opportunity Dallas is about economic mobility, why do you talk a lot about concentrated poverty and segregation? And the answer is that it's all inextricably linked, that the evidence suggests that concentrated poverty and segregation create significant barriers to economic mobility, to climbing up the income ladder, doing better than your parents did, climbing out of poverty. And you know, segregation isn't just something that we dealt with and fixed back in the 50s and 60s. Segregation means living apart from each other by race and income. And on that measure, we've made shockingly little progress. Segregation still exists very deeply today. It looks different than the 50s and 60s, of course. It's not as much in your face. There are no laws that say white schools and black schools. But there are still very much white schools and black schools, wealthy white neighborhoods, poorer Hispanic and black neighborhoods, very few mixed income neighborhoods, few diverse schools. And so let me show you a few maps that I think help make the case. And I want to thank the great folks at Commit for helping put together these maps, particularly Zach Ostertag and Robert Mundinger. We often talk about how 34% of Dallas kids live in poverty. But here's what we ignore. Half of the city's census tracts are home to 90% of children in poverty. That is shocking to think about. Instead of dispersing poverty, which we know actually helps children climb out of poverty, we have concentrated poor children into certain parts of town, usually lower opportunity areas. And we often talk about the term best practices, but rest assured this is an absolute worst practice for a city. It shouldn't surprise us that Dallas is a bad place to grow up poor compared to other cities in the nation. We're stacking the odds against poor children in every way, and we need to be intellectually honest about that. We know that 33% of Dallas kids live in concentrated poverty. That's double the state average, about triple the national average. And this map shows where concentrated poverty is. All the red areas are concentrated poverty where more than 30% of households in a neighborhood fall below the poverty line. And some neighborhoods are much worse than 30%. And you can't talk about this without talking about race. That people of color are far more likely to live in concentrated poverty than whites. Take a look at these maps. As a city, Dallas is 23% black, 41% Hispanic, and 32% white. So we're pretty close to a 30-30-30 city. There is no racial majority in Dallas. But look at this map for the city. Everywhere where you see a red shade, that's a census tract that has a majority race, where greater than 50% of one race is living in that tract. The vast majority of tracts are shaded in. We have no racial majority in the city as a whole, but the vast majority of our neighborhoods have a majority race. And then, of course, in this map, there's Highland Park, which isn't technically City of Dallas, but it's heavy majority white. And then you look at this map. You can see how the races in Dallas are almost like opposing magnetic fields, like three separate puzzle pieces. Whites as the majority race in the north, blacks as the majority race in the south, and Hispanics as the majority race along the outskirts of the city. We also did what's called a dissimilarity index. It measures how evenly distributed the races are across the city. It's the most common measure of segregation nationally. And this is an entirely hypothetical exercise. But what we find in Dallas is that 2 out of 3 residents would need to move for our neighborhoods to be fully integrated. That's how segregated we are. That 2 out of 3 people in Dallas would need to move to get to full integration. Now, of course, nobody's arguing that we should forcibly move people. This is simply a hypothetical calculation that reveals just how deep our segregation is. It's no surprise that we have deeply segregated schools. This map shows only 4% of public schools in the city of Dallas could be considered socioeconomically and racially diverse. But then the question becomes, are segregated neighborhoods of color poor by coincidence or chance? Or does the very nature of segregation cause them to be poor? And research suggests that to a large degree, segregation causes and perpetuates generational poverty. Segregation isolates people. If most of your peers, family, and neighbors are poor, you lack the connections for business and job opportunities. You're often isolated from the political process, which means your neighborhoods can't effectively lobby for city resources to keep up the sidewalks, infrastructure, alleyways, which means property values decline and the property tax base suffers, and that raises the tax rates for everyone. Concentrated poverty produces enormous challenges for schools, and student outcomes suffer, which hinders achievement and long-term educational attainment. Banks disinvest, businesses and jobs flee, the consumer base drops, which means no grocery stores, restaurants, pharmacies, no banks, minimal access to healthcare. This is compounded inequality. It's disadvantage every which way. And we talk a lot about poverty in Dallas, but we often overlook segregation, as if it's just a natural condition or something that's maybe only tangentially related to poverty. Maybe some of us think that there's nothing really that harmful about the fact that we live separately by race and income. Try as we might, I don't think it's possible to have a serious conversation about poverty in Dallas without talking about the structures of segregation that cause and perpetuate poverty in the first place. Segregation isn't the only driver of poverty, but it's a very major one. In dealing with poverty, improving economic mobility means dealing with segregation. Poverty is often a symptom of segregation. Segregation is a trap that keeps people in generational poverty. And look, we all want a more equitable city, more equitable schools, where kids have a realistic chance of being successful, not a long shot. But we can't maintain economic and racial segregation at the levels that we have and achieve real, true, genuine equity. We've known for a long time that separate but equal is inherently unequal, but we allow its structures to persist anyway. We need to confront our flaws and address them and say the words that nobody really wants to say. Our anti-poverty efforts in this city will never be as effective as they could be until we have a strategy to promote socioeconomic and racial diversity, both in our neighborhoods and in our schools.